In everything we do, we are responsible, accountable to our people, our investors, our customers, and the communities where we operate. We are proud, with deep roots and a proven track record of success. We are skillful with a strong knowledge of our business, constantly developing and upgrading our skills and techniques, and we are dynamic, focused and prepared to pursue new opportunities. We should all be proud of our 85-year history, during which we have built a strong reputation from our stable operating base in northern Manitoba. Make no mistake, our strong commitment to Manitoba has not changed. This is where we come from. It's our hometown. And it will always be an important part of our identity and a source of strength for our business. What has changed is that we're now also focused on exporting into other geographies where we do so well here at home. Today is about telling the world who we are, what we stand for, and where we are going. It's also about sending a clear message that we are one company guided by a common mission and shared values, by a successful way of doing business, and by the extraordinary talent and dedication of our people.
As Hudbay Mining, they operated a smelter in Flin Flon, Manitoba. And it was one of the dirtiest facilities in Canada in terms of emissions. The highest amount of sulfur dioxide, cadmium, mercury, lead, arsenic of any facility in Canada.
We've always known the smelter smoke was an issue. I mean, the stack used to be 1/3 the size. When the smelter blew, there were days when you just didn't come out of your house. It blew so badly. When they built the new stack, it kind of took some of that away. However, having said that, all it did was make the plume area a little larger, and it was dropping toxins all over the place. And it never was reported to anybody. Everybody knew. I mean, we weren't glowing in the dark. Let's put it that way.
In the early 1990s, we first started sampling in the area. We found that the farther away you went from the smelter, the metal concentrations, both in the soil and in the vegetables, decreased exponentially. But because the smelter was located right in town, this meant that a lot of people were very close to the stack, and some of them were receiving very high levels of fallout of metals.
That stuff would just come down and a lot of people would be choking and stuff.
When it first came to light back in the 80s and 90s that there was a big problem, that there was a high level of, there was a lot of accumulation of metals in and around the Flin Flon area from this operation. I don't understand why some level of government, whether it's the province or the feds, didn't start regulating them and forcing them to reduce their emissions. That didn't happen.
There was a soil study done by Manitoba Conservation back in 2007 that indicated that there was increased metals in the soil. They found that the urine samples for lead levels in the children, it was higher than what would have been anticipated for children in other areas across the country. There was a human health risk assessment that was done by a company hired by Hudbay Mining and Smelting.
Their conclusions completely did not jive with the actual results. If you look at the actual numbers in the report.
There is elevated levels of lead in the blood of children. And to then turn around and say the risks are minor and not really a big problem, to me is walking away from responsibility.
It makes the picture look better than it actually is, I think, in a way. So there is some misleading happening there.
The first year, The story came out, nobody in town knew it was happening. The Hudbay kept it quiet. They came to us and said they weren't going to keep it quiet anymore. They will be the first to know. Unfortunately, we weren't the first to know the next year. And it came out again.
Hudbay likes to point out that everything they did in Manitoba was legal and permitted by the government. And the government was trying to move the company in a direction of cleaning up the smelter emissions, but Hudbay is right, they weren't operating illegally or out of compliance. Just the regime that was created was very permissive to allow them to do that. And I would say that a responsible company would not allow emissions to be released such that kids had to be kept indoors, regardless of whether or not it was permitted by the government.
HB's operation was around for decades before there was a whole lot of significant environmental regulation around. They did what was legal at the time, and they changed as regulations changed.
The federal government finally passed new regulations saying that they had to do better on cleaning the air coming out of the smelter, and at that point Hudbay said, well, we're just going to close the smelter down.
What has changed is the inhalation risk. That's gone down now with the smelter closed, so people are not inhaling necessarily the pollutants. They're being exposed through things like dust, through contact with dirt, through dust in their homes, and through potentially any food grown locally or fish that they may be consuming that is contaminated. There is lead poisoning in the community. There's no doubt it's in those numbers.
What we found was that the Spruce Point mine, which had been closed since about 1992, the remnant water on site there is incredibly toxic. The government and Hudbay had both been saying that this area was cleaned up. So we went back in and revisited the site and took water samples and had them analyzed. The water tests were so clear, 1,000 times more heavy metals in the water than there should be, that Hudbay is, they're not being very truthful about this for certain. Whatever their monitoring process of their old operations, which they should have something more stringent than what they're doing, we had to go on a site to show them that there were problems with their operation. Hudbay actually hosted a private dinner in Winnipeg, trying to assuage the concerns of anybody who had objected to this new mine. Perhaps Hudbay was saying stuff that would hopefully appease people in the room, but it wasn't the truth, and that's going to be a big concern for anybody who's looking at Hudbay's operation. It needs independent verification for virtually everything they're doing to know that they're not going to be causing more ecological damage than they're advertising.
Hudbay's been operating in our ancestral lands for almost 100 years. They've harvested over 160 billion tons of ore from our territory, and they've never offered anything to our community. For instance, the Reed Lake mine is actually in a provincial park. Provincial parks are supposed to be left untouched. They're supposed to be pristine. They're part of conservation and environmentalism, but for whatever reason, the provincial government of the day has allowed this company to open a copper mine right in some of the most important waterways in northern Manitoba. I issued stop work orders based on our sovereignty, that if they're not willing to deal with us in a meaningful way, then they shouldn't be doing any work, right? The project shouldn't start if you hadn't completed your discussions or your negotiations. As we got to the sites, for whatever reason, the company shut their gates. We literally sat out there for at least 3 hours before somebody even came out to talk to us to see what we were doing or what we were up to. They decided to file a court injunction against myself and all of the people of my nation. Not initially, their injunction was anywhere that Hudbay had an interest, we couldn't go. Hudbay has an interest in almost 90% of my territory. And also, it's a $400 million lawsuit. They claim that was the amount of money that they had lost in productivity that day.
It's completely unacceptable that on the one hand we're told we need to respect the rule of law, but in the same breath we're bending rules for big business and corporations.
There's a long-standing land dispute between Hudbay and the Mayan communities regarding ownership of the land. The Mayan Kekchi say that they have been on that land for centuries, that they have a historic and legal right to that claim. And Hudbay is trying to stand narrowly on its legal rights, were apparently granted to it during the Guatemalan Civil War. We represent 13 Mayan Kekchi from Guatemala in 3 related lawsuits against Hudbay Minerals. First one is regarding the death of Adolfo Each, who was hacked with machetes and shot in the head by mine company security personnel. The second lawsuit is brought on behalf of Herman Chub, who's a young Guatemalan father. He was shot the same day as Adolfo Each, also by mine company's security personnel. The bullet tore through his shoulder and through his lung and smashed into his spine, and the bullet's still there today. You can see it on the x-rays. And he's paralyzed from about the chest down. And the third lawsuit is brought on behalf of 11 Kekchi women who were gang raped by mine security personnel during, and police and military during an eviction of their village in 2007 when the mine was owned by Sky Resources, which was later purchased by Hudbay Minerals. There were 2 evictions of the community of Lote Ocho, which is where our clients are based. The first one was in January 10th, and the second one was on January 17th. And after the first eviction, the community moved back, started to rebuild their homes, rebuild their community. Despite the fact that Sky knew that the previous evictions in other communities had been violent, it involved houses being burnt down, they still pushed forward for a second eviction immediately. During that second eviction, there were hundreds of men with guns from security forces, military, police that arrived in the village. They arrived in the early evening when a lot of the men were still in their fields, and our clients were surrounded by the men with guns, and all of them, all 11, were gang raped.
La ola echal na heha nep jakain la kana ka chukwa jakunshil jak utoho nak la ok jili alal kahol per uto kana igdil to ko ke ma ho hulah liril ke bali rin to lah to so.
The previous mining company, Sky Resources, had instituted a number of evictions of mining communities. And in September 2009, there were fears that there was going to be future evictions. And as a result, there was a community protest. And in the context of that protest, a number of people were shot, including Herman and including Adolfo Each. 7 others actually were shot with shotguns, the youngest of which was 15. All the injuries suffered that day were suffered by the community at the hands of mine security.
Estoy tan tranquila porque espiritualmente para mí la ceremonia maya me hace sentir, me hace unir con mis seres queridos que se han ido, así como mi esposo. Yo siento la comunicación con él. Ajá. Es cierto que yo no soy ni una gran profesional, yo no tengo estudio, pero sé respetar. Ajá. Ellos me han hecho un gran daño Muchas veces mi padre me lo ha dicho, no guardes rencor. Solo pedirle a Dios la justicia.
La música me hace, a mí, en mi persona, me hace sentir alegre, porque a veces hay momentos me desespero, hay momentos dolorosos que yo siento. No, me dijeron, no podemos operarte. Es que usted váyase, regrese en su casa, espera la muerte allá en su casa. Porque aquí no te podemos hacer nada. No tengo miedo de decir la verdad. Que se hagan culpables, que aceptan sus errores o que aceptan lo que hicieron ellos en mi vida. Yo tengo que luchar. Es cierto, somos indígenas, pero podemos hablar, podemos buscar justicia para salir adelante. La música me ha ayudado, me ha dado ánimo con mi familia, porque yo he visto la obra de Dios en mi persona. Por Dios estoy vivo todavía.
The situation in Guatemala that Hudbay walked into and continued to exacerbate some very serious human rights abuses. Given the degree of impunity that exists in Guatemala for such crimes, very low likelihood that justice would ever be served in Guatemala. And so the case is proceeding here in Canada, which is an important precedent.
We thank you, everyone who's here. We thank the media and everyone who's supporting us for this struggle that we're going through.
Muchas veces me pregunto si ustedes, los accionistas y los dueños de Hudbay, saben lo que nos pasó a nosotros en Guatemala. Me pregunto, ¿se les ha dicho la verdad? Me pregunto si les parece bien ser dueños de una empresa que niega el daño que hemos sufrido y no hace nada para repararlos. Mi pregunta para ustedes es, ¿reconocerán los daños que sufrimos? Yo, Rosa Elvira, y las 11 mujeres, Germa y nuestra familia, nuestras comunidades. ¿Y qué harán para reparar esos daños?
I wonder if you, the shareholders, the owners of Hudbay...
I reiterate, those allegations are absolutely without basis. We deny them categorically. Hudbay had nothing to do with any of those alleged incidents, and that will be borne out in court.
So unfortunately, Hudbay has dealt with this entire incident and the lawsuit as a PR problem rather than an actual human problem. If there's anything that they can deny, they do deny it until they can't deny it anymore. They've fought very hard in the litigation about all points, and we expect that to continue. So they've provided no information or explanation of what they think happened to Adolfo Each if he wasn't shot by their security personnel and hacked with machetes by their security personnel. Same thing with Herman Chub. They've made no efforts to try and make things right. And in fact, there seems to be a big distance between the stuff that they say that they will do in the human rights policy. In a lot of their CSR literature, they talk a lot about the importance of responsibility and the importance of good neighborly relations. And yet in this lawsuit, we've seen neither of those things. Instead, it's been blanket denials.
In everything we do, we are responsible.
Nos está rodeando la policía.
Yo pido que retire Hudbay de inmediatamente sus cosas y que se vaya a Canadá. No queremos en otro cargo. No queremos para que mate a nuestros hijos así, no. Para que nos maltrate así, no queremos a Hudbay.
Cruelmente las policías le han soltado bombas lacrimógenas. Lo han agarrado puñete, patada, lo han maltratado a las señoras que tienen bebés, a las señoras de mayores de edad, a las señoras gestantes. No han respetado los derechos humanos.
There's been 250 people that have been killed in connection with protests around mining projects and other social environmental conflicts in Peru just in the last 8 years. Over 1,000 that have been injured, hundreds that are criminalized. So communities are in tremendously unfavorable situation to have their concerns, very legitimate and important concerns, heard, because they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of the very long-term impacts that a huge open pit copper project is going to have on their lives. It's going to transform those communities forever, socially, economically, environmentally, you name it.
Y es más, desde hace una quincena de años tenemos este área verde, gracias a nuestro recurso natural que es el agua, elemento vital para el riego. En varias oportunidades nosotros hemos sido campeón en cuanto a la ganadería y en mejoramiento genético y en productos lácteos, acá en Uchucarco. Pero que desde luego en el futuro llega la minera Hudbay y corremos un alto riesgo ahora en cuidar nuestras represas, porque están cerquísima a unos 10 kilómetros o quizá un poco menos, donde está el Tajo Abierto, que está en apertura ahorita, llámese Saigualoma. Estas 3 lagunas corren el alto riesgo para el futuro. Es una preocupación para mi comunidad, es una preocupación para todo este sector Uchucarco, que en el futuro podría sufrir del problema del agua, podría reducirse estas represas con el impacto que están operando en la empresa Hudbay. Y al mismo tiempo nos promete mejorar esta infraestructura, pero que no está cumpliendo en absoluto sus promesas. Siempre ha practicado a mentirnos, ha practicado a engañarnos, engatusarnos y sorprendernos. Por eso es que en estos instantes, Uchucarco, aquí en la provincia de Chumbivilcas, región Cusco, Perú, estamos en pie de marcha.
Peru's gone through the last 20 years of sort of progressive neoliberal deregulation in the mining and environmental sectors, and that leaves communities with very little protection. And when they try to actually appeal to the water authority, the environmental authority, with their concerns, they get shut down, and those channels simply aren't open to them. And so their only recourse tends to be to protest, take the site of the mine as they did in November to try to renegotiate, try to leverage change, and that's in effect putting their lives on the line.
Entonces, por lo tanto, nosotros estamos rechazando rotundamente por el incumplimiento, reclamando nuestros justos derechos, porque nos tiene que respetar nuestros derechos, porque ha vulnerado a la comunidad, nos ha dividido a la comunidad, ofreciendo falsos compromisos. Entonces, por eso nosotros acá estamos en nuestro terreno, en pie de lucha hasta conseguir nuestro objetivo, hasta que nos digan, este es mi compromiso, pero si no se cumple, nosotros rechazaremos nuestra lucha.
And what Uchucarco was speaking about was all the failures in compliance with that agreement, social and environmental clauses that hadn't been lived up to, and that they were ready to rescind the agreement if there wasn't some change. They took the mine site, and there was some repression in the process, and then things sort of de-escalated when they got into dialogue. But those are latent conflicts. They haven't gone away and they haven't been completely resolved.
O sea, en el caso del país, específicamente en Perú, la protesta está siendo limitada, ¿no? O sea, hay normas que están, que casi todo termina siendo delito, ¿no? O sea, hacer un ejercicio de la libertad de expresión en la puerta de un campamento es delito, pararse en la carretera es delito. Es un escenario bastante delicado porque, digamos, por las normas que se han modificado en nuestro país, donde la policía puede impactar, disparar directamente en el cuerpo de una persona si es que hay un contexto de conflictividad. O sea, digamos, el conflicto podría escalar y ahí se podría generar heridos, muertos, ¿no?
Was it one of the observations of the Human Rights Mission that went up to the site during the protest was that there was police officers that were wearing company logos that were in and out of the mine site during the course of those events, which raised for me the question about whether or not the company might have a contract with local police, which is something that is permitted under Peruvian law, has been since the 90s, and which is a great concern in terms of how the state security apparatus, the law enforcement apparatus and the justice system have really been diverted and skewed to favor corporate interests.
Yo tengo un moretón que está todo verde en mi brazo. Yo les voy a mostrar ante cámaras, la cual yo he sido golpeado por el policía de esta manera. Así, salvajemente, brutalmente. No creo que sean policías del Estado. La empresa Hudbay se ha traído matones del Perú. No es esto, no creo que sean policías estos señores.
Tascan chayñintan carretera hay común que empresa Hudbay nisqaman chaypin nuqaykota afectawanku polvadera nisqawan hinataq carrokuna purin imaymana carro purin manan chay anchaytan nuqayku reclamakuyku hinallataq chay carreteranta imaymana o sea carrokuna purin ashka chanin sarwanqaku ovejaykutapas waqaykutapas sarunñan ovejatapas
manang paiko na respetan kuchu karteran ta purik shankena yakanya tangkar parison ke kops kay karukuna chay karukuna poring kay empresa Hudbay anchay mang hayko mongka haykon ta karipun ta hena chay nyenta.
In everything we do, we are responsible.
Once you finish Constancia in Peru, you'll be roughly the 25th biggest copper producer in the world.
And Rosemont actually brings us up another 10 levels in terms of the world copper producers.
All things being equal, we'd love to start construction next year.
The Rosemont proposal sits square in the middle of the intersection of three major wildlife corridors.
Not while I'm in office will I ever cease to be opposed to Santa Rita's becoming an open pit mine.
It's an intrusion with a multitude of negative effects on the region.
This mine is just in the wrong place.
Well, these mountain ranges in southern Arizona and northern Mexico are called Sky Islands, and they are a global biodiversity hotspot. They have such huge differences in elevation and precipitation and vegetation. It's at the crossroads of a couple of different deserts and major continental mountain ranges, and it really lends itself to a lot of niche species, incredibly high level of biodiversity.
The Rosemont area was the home to Native American people 1,000 years ago. They're a recreational place that has been used for generations for many people in Tucson. We also are very fortunate to have riparian areas, streams with actual running water in them, which is uncommon in southern Arizona, that they support populations of small, endangered fish. We feel that those would probably be decimated if this mine were to go through. There are aesthetic concerns. Who wants to look up at hundreds of feet of tailings instead of a beautiful mountain ridge? There's the impacts to the telescope that's up there. It's going to make the sky brighter. There's the aesthetic concerns about the road and safety concerns about the highway. There's only one way to get in and out of the Santa Ritas. It's what will happen to our water and our air. This mine is going to have some really serious impacts.
It's not just spin when I've tried to present the #1 issue that I have a problem with at the Rosemont copper site is certainly water. People in southern Arizona like their potable drinking water. They don't want a trade-off. Why sell tomorrow to pay for today is the opinion of most of the people that I represent.
We don't have a lot of flowing streams, water that's actually on the surface of the ground, as much of the world does, as they certainly do in Canada. So when we have a place like Cienega Creek, where there is actually water in the desert year-round, that is very, very important. They would diminish the water, drinking water on the west side of the mountains, send the water over, then it gets dirty, gets polluted, and then send that dirty water into these streams where it will, one, undoubtedly destroy the fish population, and what's more, contaminate 20% of our drinking water. So this is not a good deal in any way from a water point of view.
So we've committed to putting 105% of the water we withdraw back into the aquifer.
To be able to, with a straight face, say that you're going to someday replace the potable drinking water of the Santa Cruz upper water users group with cap water is farcical. There's just no way that that promise will be met. It's no way that it's credible.
They're going to blast a pit into the ground that's several thousand feet deep. When they go down into that aquifer, they're going to create what's called a cone of depression. It's like sticking a straw into something and just sucking all the water out. That groundwater that would normally go down gradient and discharge into Cienega Creek and support all that habitat there, it's going to be sucked back towards the mine. And even after the mine closes, they're going to leave this big toxic pit lake there, and the evaporation is going to continue drawing water out of that aquifer forever.
These are springs that come out of the Santa Ritas. Nobody knows just exactly how that moves through the ground. It's got to go at least 4 or 5 miles to get here through the ground from the mountain range. And in between there is going to be the proposed pit. It would intersect that water before it even reaches this point. And that is what would bring it down. And if it even goes down a foot or two, that's all it takes to dry up the spring, and the spring is what is making this water possible.
My discretion for this draft decision is limited by legal authority that I have under the existing mining laws.
Forest Service professes to everyone that they have no way of stopping this mine, that there's nothing they can say, that they have to allow this company to destroy thousands of acres of public land that they manage.
There are limits on my authority to regulate the statutory right provided in regulations for potential interests in mining claims under both the takings clause of the U.S. Constitution and under other statutes that does not allow the Forest Service to endanger or materially interfere with prospecting, mining, or processing operations.
The disappointment has been Forest Service that rather than look at other uses and look at protecting that region, has seen it fit to say, well, we can't say no, so therefore we're going to try to make it work. Philosophically, I think that that's been the problem from the beginning.
There's more than a dozen species that are affected by this that are at some level of protection or in the pipeline to be protected under the Endangered Species Act. That includes jaguar, ocelot, fish and frogs that live in Cienega Creek, bird species that rely on the beautiful riparian cottonwood gallery that exists there, plants that live in the Rosemont area. The biggest conflict by far is the jaguar, because there's one in the United States right now, and it lives just about a half mile from where that pit is supposed to be located. So there's no way that the company can avoid harming that animal. At the very least, it's going to destroy its home territory.
The Corps of Engineers has made it pretty clear that this really is not a project that can be mitigated.
And therefore, that permit is hanging in the balance. We believe that this is a particularly egregious case where the damage cannot be mitigated and that permit should be denied.
I'm relying on Army Corps to do this the right way. I'm relying on Army Corps to put the law and the consequence and the science ahead of the pressure they're going to get.
The EPA can veto that decision, and they have made it pretty clear that that's what they would do. So we think it's unlikely that the mine will get the necessary permits.
The permitting process is advancing. We're not making predictions on it because we don't control it, but it's moving ahead and we're happy with what the regulators are doing and how they're approaching things.
Really only 5 countries where we would put meaningful capital to work in because we want the certainty of permitting, we want the certainty of getting our capital back out and getting that return on investment.
That's a piece of information I would think the average investor would want to have. It is a required permit, and if they don't have that air quality permit, they cannot legally proceed.
Would you consider the loss of the air permit a material matter, given that you can't build the mine?
Absolutely, and it's great that you forced him on that disclosure issue in front of his stockholders, because that type of cover-up is really, in my opinion, the type of white-collar malfeasance that we've seen from their predecessor with Hudbay. You've had the predecessor being Rosemont, Augusta, the same type of non-disclosure to their stockholders.
It's not just a bunch of local folks, like me, who are opposed to it. We have many governmental entities, the city of Tucson, the Pima counties, and the tribal communities, Tohono O'odham, the Yaqui, are all opposed to it. And our congressman, Raul Grijalva, and our former congressman, Ron Barber, and preceding him, Gabrielle Giffords, have all been opposed to it. So there's a lot of people in powerful places, a lot of elected officials that also understand that this is a really bad idea.
We're working to stop them every place that we can. We want to challenge every single one of their permits if we can, because this is too important for us to just give up and give this land away.
Defeating something like this is always difficult, particularly out in the West, particularly that you're living under a law, 1872 Mining Act, that practically says mining is sacrosanct in the West. It pays no royalties, its extraction is encouraged, and it limits land use agencies in terms of denial.
It was passed in 1872 in the term of President Grant, right after the Civil War. The idea was to open up the West. Well, it certainly did that.
Now the West has a whole bunch of competing interests, outdoor recreation. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's sustainable. It's not the kind of industry where you have to completely destroy an area in order to make a profit from it.
So when you have a company like Rosemont that is willing to spend millions upon millions of dollars, having a law like the 1872 mining law as the vehicle for their effort, yeah, that's one of the core problems, is that law that essentially carte blanche tells mining companies, come and get this.
They've left a trail of destruction behind them everywhere they've gone. So you have to be cautious and hope that your regulator is on top of things and on your side and on the side of the environment.
There's numerous red flags with the Rosemont project. It should be a project of national concern, given the importance of the habitat for endangered wildlife as well, the aquifer, national forest lands.
We can't just abuse and continue to rape our environment without any consequences and without being accountable. because all of this will come back to haunt us. Maybe not us in our present lifetime, but in future generations. They're going to curse us for our stupidity and our greed.
We are experiencing elevated levels of certain toxins, highly elevated levels in some areas. It's got to have some possible health effect to the citizens of our area. But
in Hudbay's case, if they can find areas where there are lax environmental laws, where they're not required to do any more than the bare minimum, then that's what they're going to do, because that's going to be cheaper for them.
Hudbay, they're accustomed to getting their way, that they're bullies, and that you have to check everything that they tell you.
Hudbay has organized itself through a series of subsidiaries. Some of those are based overseas. They organize themselves in that way to avoid paying tax and to avoid liability. This case is an attempt to say that the law needs to match the reality. Hudbay needs to be responsible for what happens on the ground, because it's the one that finances it, and it's the one that controls it, and it's the one that benefits from it. And if something goes wrong, it should be the one that's responsible for it.
The people of Arizona are in a good moment right now. The mine hasn't been built, so they have an opportunity to have their interests protected and to make sure that their ecosystems, that their water, that what's important to them is preserved.
For Hudbay, that water is really just there to turn into a profit, and they want to suck as much of it out of the ground as they can to get their mine up and running and keep it running for as long as it's profitable to them. And after that, they don't really care anymore.
Our generation is at a point where we have to decide, is this something that we value, or do we want to allow mining to trump the environment and make their profits over short-term mineral extraction and sacrifice this forever? Once this is gone, it's gone. It's not coming back.
I've worked through this whole company, and not once have I heard one employee say they're proud to work for HBM&S.
I completely contradict that. I have been here almost every month since I started here in July 2010. I talked to individuals. I've never heard that attitude, ever. I've been in the mining business for 22 years, and this is the best operating culture in the mining business in the world. So I don't appreciate that comment in the least. We have a lot to be proud of here.